Hello. It is that time of year again. College football is back on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, which means it is time for midweek action. Every Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we will be treated to a slate of action, and it is one of the best times of the year. We have football every single day up until Thanksgiving right now, and we couldn't ask for more at this point. Midweek action is loved by the internet. And it's a great phenomenon. Whether you are somebody who has been tuning into MAC football games all season long, you're a fan or an alum, or if you have a monetary investment in these games, or if you're just looking to have a good time on Tuesday, Wednesday nights, having fun and watching football, I am here to break down all the MAC matchups for you. My name is Steve Helwick. I am in my 7th season covering Mid-American Conference football, and I have had a blast doing it. I started back in 2016 when Western Michigan made that special Cotton Bowl run when they went 13-1 under PJ Fleck and lost to Wisconsin in that New Year's Six Bowl, and the MAC has been great in the years coming since. Now, midweek action is all about fun, chaos, and action in general. Back in 2011, we had games that were like 66 to 63 or 63 to 60, all the way up until 2020 when we had Western Michigan and Toledo have the fake spike and the onside kick. We just have so much chaos that always goes on these nights, and there's highlights every single time. And in the past few years, these games have been so closely knitted, which just shows how much parity has been in this conference. Because since that 2016 Western Michigan team, there hasn't really been a MAC team that has been a New Year's Six contender. Now, this year's conference has as much parity as pretty much ever, because Toledo just became the first bowl eligible team in the conference through their 9th game. They are now 6-3 after beating Eastern Michigan on Saturday, 27-24. I'm going to get a little bit into this game for those that want to know more of the background of the conference this year. Right now, Toledo has a stranglehold on the MAC West. According to the ESPN FPI, they have over a 90% chance of appearing in the MAC championship game and winning that division. And that 27-24 victory over Eastern Michigan is a huge part why. Toledo is now 6-3. They only have one loss in conference play, and that is to the Buffalo Bulls, which is a segue. The Buffalo Bulls lead the MAC East, and they are the only team in the conference with an undefeated record in league play. Now, things weren't always great for the Buffalo Bulls. They started 0-3, looked to be one of the worst teams in the country after losing to an FCS team, Holy Cross, on a Hail Mary in week 2. And they were one of the last 6 teams in the FBS that were sitting winless. But the Buffalo Bulls realized that years don't end after the first 3 games of the season, and they still had a lot of special things ahead of them. And they have been great since. They've been on a roll. They've won 5 consecutive games. And now Buffalo is 5-3, undefeated in MAC play. And they're at the top of the standings, and they have a big game against the Ohio Bobcats on Tuesday night in Athens, Ohio, which we are about to talk about. Now, we have 4 games this week. We have 2 on Tuesday, November 1st. We have 2 on Wednesday, November 2nd. We already had 2 MAC games take place over the weekend. Miami, Ohio beat Akron 27-9 thanks to the return of quarterback Brett Gabbert, who missed a lot of the season, and a really stellar Miami defense, which forced some turnovers, and they've been great at defending the run all year. So we won't talk about Miami, and we won't talk about Akron as that game already happened. Also, Toledo and Eastern Michigan. The Toledo Rockets, they didn't have their starting quarterback DeQuan Finn, who can be an explosive playmaker, but they did have backup Tucker Gleason, a former Georgia Tech transfer, who had 3 touchdown passes, while Toledo's defense stepped up and got some late stops to get that 27-24 win over the Eastern Michigan Eagles at the factory. So that is what has happened in the MAC already. Now we have the 8 remaining teams to play this week. So let's break them down. Starting on Tuesday night, the Ball State Cardinals versus Kent State Golden Flashes. This game will be played at Kent State, and this should be a pretty fun one at Dick's Stadium. Kent State Golden Flashes, they won the MAC East last year. They had an explosive offense. They had a quarterback, Dustin Crum, one of the better dual-threat quarterbacks in the country. And Sean Lewis and that Kent State offense have been really fun and explosive to watch over the years. And this year is no exception, even though Dustin Crum is no longer on campus. So you might say, why is Kent State 3-5? Well, I can break that down for you. Kent State loves to schedule grueling non-conference schedules. This has been a theme of the program in recent years. In 2018, they went at Illinois, at Penn State, and at Ole Miss. In 2019, they went at Arizona State, at Wisconsin, and at Auburn. In 2020, there was a pandemic season, and they did not have non-conference scheduling. Kent State only had 1 loss that season. And in 2021, they went right back to it with at Texas A&M, at Iowa, and at Maryland. And if those three non-conference schedules that I just mentioned didn't sound bad enough, this is what Kent State did this year. At Washington, at Oklahoma, and at Georgia. But they actually played Georgia respectably. At the time, they gave Georgia a better challenge than any team did in college football, coming within as close as 10 points of the Bulldogs in the fourth quarter. Now, Kent State is 3-5 with those three non-conference losses, but they also have two conference losses already. They did squander a 21-0 lead to Toledo as Toledo's offense took over that game and won in 52-31 fashion. Kent State also lost a game to Miami, Ohio, where turnovers really hampered them in that performance, and Miami's defense, which I mentioned earlier, stifled Akron over the weekend. Miami's defense was able to get the best of Kent State's explosive offense. Now, Kent State is really fun to watch. They run a lot of RPO, they run a lot of tempo, and they have another dual threat quarterback in Colin Schlee. Schlee missed Kent State's last game against Akron, but I think he may be able to return, although Sean Lewis has not made that clear in some of his recent press conferences. So they could go to the backup Devin Cargman, who did do a pretty decent job at leading the team over Akron in the wagon wheel rivalry in Kent State's last outing. But even if Kent State doesn't have a certainty at the quarterback position, don't forget, this is a team that has finished top 3 in rushing offense in each of the past 2 seasons, and their starting running back from both of those teams, Marquez Cooper, is still on campus. Marquez Cooper can take over a game, and we have seen him do that several times this season. Marquez Cooper had 137 yards against Akron, 166 against Toledo, and 240 against Ohio. And those are 3 of his last 4 outings. Can just take over a game from that position. Then you have Brian Bradford, who's more of a tank running back, who has impressive speed for his size. He can just shoot out of a cannon, and we saw some of that in the Akron game last week. So this Kent State team loves to run the ball. They have great receivers too. Dante Cephas and Devontae Walker. Walker has outsped Washington defenders, outsped Georgia defenders. He has that max speed. And Walker is just an explosive threat to watch, while Dante Cephas is one of the most complete receivers, if not the most complete receiver in the MAC. I think he could be mid-round NFL talent. He has a size, he has a strength, he has a break tackle ability, and he has a nice degree of speed. Dante Cephas is someone who's had over 200 receiving yards in a game this year, and he can take over those games. Now, the problem with Kent State has usually been the defense in the Sean Lewis era. And Kent State did fire their defensive coordinator last season, and they need to have some improvements on that side of the ball. Unfortunately for the Golden Flashes, one of their best defenders, their safety Antoine Richardson, is going to be out for the remainder of the year. So Kent State's going to need a little more help in the secondary in this one. But Kent State also does have some good veteran secondary players. Montre Miller, he's been a playmaker from the cornerback position before. He's somebody who had the pass deflection, which sent them to the MAC championship last year. Also had 4 interceptions last year. That's a name you're going to watch against Ball State's receiving core. Now let's get into Ball State a little bit. Ball State Cardinals, I cannot give them enough praise for this season because I thought going into the season that Ball State was going to be one of the worst teams in the MAC. Ball State won the MAC championship in 2020 with a very senior heavy class. Then Ball State returned all those guys for 2021 thanks to the COVID extra year of eligibility. They became a super senior heavy class. And they lost it all this offseason. So I thought Ball State was going to be in the midst of a major rebuild. Instead, this team is 4-4, and they're 2 games away from bowl eligibility, which is not what I expected. They beat Northern Illinois in a really impressive game. Nice comeback earlier this year, coming back down from 3 scores to win the Bronze Stock Trophy. Now, what's fun about Ball State? The running back Carson Steele. I think they call him Thor. He has nice long locks. He's a 6'1", 215-pound running back. He looks like he's a classic NFL fullback at times. And Carson Steele's super fun to watch because this guy loves hurdling more than maybe any other player in college football, with the exception of BYU's fullback Mason Wake, if you've ever seen his highlights. Carson Steele loves the hurdle defenders, and he has just so much going for him in the run game this year. So far, he has 8 touchdowns, 890 yards, and Carson Steele was good last year. He had 891 yards that whole season, so he's going to break that mark just here on Tuesday night. And other things about Ball State is John Paddock has done a really good job taking over for Drew Plitt at quarterback, so you're going to see a lot of him, and they have good receivers. Ja'Shawn Jackson was a former Cincinnati Bearcat. Ja'Shawn Jackson's done a really good job at taking over that number 1 receiver role this year. and you're going to have to see him go up against that Kent State defense that I was talking about this earlier that has struggled at times at defending both the run and the pass. So Kent State right now ranks 125th out of 131 teams in passing defense, so you could see Ball State exploit some of that. So that is the first matchup on Tuesday night. Going to the second matchup, this is your game of the week right here. The Buffalo Bulls and the Ohio Bobcats. Ohio only has one loss in MAC play, and that is to Kent State, and that game went to overtime. Ohio is the most improved team in the MAC this year. Maybe. You could give that award to Buffalo, too. Both of these teams are operating under second-year head coaches who took their lumps in their first seasons. Mo Linguist came into Buffalo after taking over for Lance Leipold, and Tim Albin took over for the long-tenured great head coach Frank Solich, who stepped down unexpectedly prior to the 2021 season. So both these teams are operating under second-year head coaches, and both of them have made giant leaps in year two at the helm. Buffalo. Now, if you watch Buffalo in the Lance Leipold era, this was not exactly the definition of a balanced offense because Buffalo was so good on the ground that they could throw 10 times in a game and it would suffice. Buffalo is a little more balanced now that they're not really in the Jarrett Patterson, Kevin Marks era that they had when they had Lance Leipold, where they would just run down teams' throats and Jarrett Patterson would post 300, 400 yards in a game. This team's a little more balanced now, but they still have a good running game. They have the nice thunder and lightning combo that teams love to have, and they have Ron Cook Jr., who's their kick returner, an all-MAC kick returner. He's the lightning of the duo, and then the Thunder's Mike Washington, who has 6 touchdowns this year, more of a goal line threat at the running back. So that's what you get from the Buffalo Bulls on offense. Their quarterback, Cole Snyder, he's a Rutgers transfer. He's shown to deliver in big moments earlier this year, especially when he had a 3rd and long touchdown pass to beat Miami, Ohio earlier in the season. Buffalo also has a pretty decent wide receiving trio of Kean Williams, a former Eastern Michigan transfer in his second year with the Bulls. He's been rolling this year. Justin Marshall, who came over from Louisville, and then Jamari Gassett. And I think this is one of the, if you go 3 deep, this might be as good as any receiving trio in the MAC that the Bulls have. So they have that going in their favor. The offensive line hasn't been as stout as Buffalo offensive lines have been in the past, but I think that they've shown market improvement over the season. Then when you get to this team's defense, Buffalo loves to win the turnover battle. They are a plus 10 this season, and they have good linebackers and a safety, Marcus Fuqua, who leads the FBS in interceptions with 5. He had 3 in a single game recently. Marcus Fuqua is somebody you're going to have to watch, especially against a pass-happy offense like the Ohio Bobcats. So the linebackers that I was mentioning before, James Patterson, the brother of All-American running back Jarrett Patterson, who was here at Buffalo a few years ago. That's one name to watch. And then Sean Dolak, who has really stepped up this season to become the team's leading tackler. That's what you get from Buffalo, who only has 3 losses on the season, and they've won 5 straight. On the other side, you have Ohio, who is also, at this point, 5-3, which is really impressive for the Bobcats, considering where they came from a year ago. Ohio has Curtis Rourke, who leads the MAC in passing yards per game. Curtis Rourke is another brother of a great former MACtion player, and that would be Nathan Rourke, who started at Ohio from 2017 to 2019 and brought the Bobcats 3 consecutive bowl wins. If you remember Nathan Rourke, he loved those zone reads. He loved to run the ball. Curtis can run the ball, but he's more of a passing quarterback than Nathan was. This season, Curtis Rourke has 16 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He has remained efficient, has over 2,000 yards passing already. He's one of the leaders in the country in that regard. And Curtis Rourke, he has had some games where he has just taken over with his arm this season. We saw this in week 1 against FAU when he had 4 touchdowns and 345 yards. And then he had 537 yards and 4 touchdowns against Ohio's FCS opponent this year. Had a few other 300, 400-yard games in MAC play, and Curtis Rourke is just somebody that is a dynamite quarterback. And when it comes to the MAC, he's as must-see TV as they come this year. Curtis Rourke, I could not be more impressed with his improvement. If the MAC had a Most Improved Player award like the NBA, he's the clear winner. So this is going to be a fun game to watch. Ohio's defense has not exactly been there this year. They're one of the bottom in many categories, including passing defense. They allow 335 passing yards per game at a pretty high completion clip, too. So Ohio, they might suffer a lot guarding Buffalo's talented receiving core. So that's one thing to watch in this game, as the Ohio Bobcats have not been the best at guarding the pass this year. So those are your Tuesday night games: Ball State, Kent State, and Buffalo, Ohio. So for those interested in the spreads out there, Kent State is a 7-point favorite over Ball State at home. If I had to make a pick in this one, I would probably go Kent State outright, but I do like Ball State with the spread in this one, just because Ball State, they've been pretty close in their losses this year. Their only bad loss was week 1 against Tennessee, and now that we know what the Tennessee Volunteers are capable of, that loss looks even more respectable for Ball State. So their 2 conference losses this year were both by 1 possession. And Kent State, they've won some of their conference games this year in close-knit fashion, only beating Akron by 6 points, and they escaping Ohio in overtime fashion. So I do like Ball State covering the spread here against Kent State. Now, in the Buffalo, Ohio game, the spread of that one should be a little closer, especially with this one being in Athens, Ohio. This is a game that I flip-flopped a little bit on. Buffalo is 2.5-point favorites. I do like Ohio outright in this game. I like Ohio at home. I think that Ohio has a more explosive offense in this matchup, although I do understand that Buffalo is the better team defensively. I think Ohio is going to take the home field advantage and win this one, but I don't really feel as comfortable with this pick as the previous one, because this is a game that's going to go back and forth, and when a back and forth game, a 2.5-point spread is very difficult to pick. So that's what I have for the Tuesday night games. Then we'll go into the Wednesday night games. I can start out by breaking those games down and then have the spread picks at the end. Central Michigan and Northern Illinois. If you talked to me in August and you told me to circle one game on the calendar that was the most important MAC football game this year, I would have circled this one. Central Michigan and Northern Illinois had the best records in the conference last year. Central Michigan had 9 wins, Northern Illinois had 9 wins, no one else in the conference did. This is an elimination game. Both of these teams are 2-6. One of them is going to miss a bowl because of the result of Wednesday night, and that is shocking. Because Central Michigan had the nation's leading rusher last year in Lou Nichols. They returned him. They returned starting quarterback Daniel Richardson, and they returned a lot of pieces on their defensive line, which was a really talented unit last year. Seemed like they had a lot of good continuity. Northern Illinois was a really young roster in 2021. They won the MAC championship. Yes, they won a lot of games by 1 possession, and it seemed that was very hard for Northern Illinois to sustain. But they had so much young talent on this roster where I thought they would be able to carry it over into 2022 and have another successful season. That has not been the case so far, but Northern Illinois has shown flashes of potential. When they got their starting quarterback, Rocky Lombardi, back for the Eastern Michigan game, they won that game in convincing fashion because Lombardi's ability to lead the offense. So Northern Illinois, I don't know who's going to start at quarterback in this game. My gut instinct tells me it's going to be Justin Lynch. And in a recurring theme, he is a brother of a MAC great, maybe the greatest MAC player we have seen in the past decade, because he was at the Heisman ceremony as a finalist. And I'm talking about Jordan Lynch. Jordan Lynch was one of the best players to watch on these Tuesday and Wednesday night matchups. Just a great read option, zone read quarterback who could rush for 300 yards in a game. Also had some arm talent too. Led Northern Illinois to the Orange Bowl in 2012. So his brother Justin Lynch, built similarly, has a similar game style, and Justin Lynch has more rushing yards than passing yards this season. So that's what you can expect from Northern Illinois on offense, to keep things a little more run-heavy with Justin Lynch if he is in the lineup, if Rocky Lombardi and Ethan Hampton, the first and second string quarterbacks, aren't unable to go. Northern Illinois also has running back Harrison Whaley, who has been a talented running back over the past few years for the team. So that's somebody else that you can expect the offense to ride on. And don't forget Ontario Brown. While Whaley has 727 yards on the season, Brown has 575 and actually leads a team in rushing touchdowns. So that's a really good 1-2 punch that this team has, along with Justin Lynch, who's a good running quarterback. And with their Trayvon Rudolph, who was out for the season before the year, is their number 1 receiver, you can expect this team to keep things even more grounded without the presence of Rudolph in this lineup. You might remember him from having, I believe it was over 300 receiving yards in a single midweek Maction game last year. And that's why we love midweek Maction. Absurd stat lines are very common. So that's one thing about Northern Illinois. The Huskies have a pretty stout offensive line, which is a good thing for this team. There have been some issues on the defensive side of the ball this year, but Northern Illinois, they're a tough team to read right now because this is a team that's played Kentucky close. They've looked like they've been able, when they're at their best, they're a great team, and we saw it in the Eastern Michigan game. But we've also seen this team blow games to Ball State that they shouldn't have, and just fall in some of their other MAC games, and that's why they're on the verge of bowl ineligibility right now when they thought to be a conference contender. Now Central Michigan's in the same boat. Lou Nichols never found the magic that he had in the 2021 season when he was the nation's leading rusher. And I think a lot of that has to do with Central Michigan losing two day two NFL draft picks last April in Luke Gadecki and Bernard Raymond. So Central Michigan had to replace a lot of talent on that offensive line over the season, and that is not always easy to do. Central Michigan, their running game has not been able to get things going this year. They're only averaging 3.7 yards per carry. And the fact that none of the running backs could get going was one of the reasons they lost to Bowling Green in their latest outing. Quarterback situation, it looks like they're going to start Jace Bauer, would be my instinct for this one. Against Bowling Green, they did a rotating series of Daniel Richardson, who had been the starter in the prior year, and Jace Bauer, and they ultimately rode the hot hand of Bauer, who had a decent passing game, but Bauer really provided for Central Michigan in the run game, which they otherwise lacked. He had over 100 yards there when no running back got over 16 yards in that game. So Jace Bauer at the quarterback position is where I expect Central Michigan to go in this one. Now, the Chippewas' offensive line has not been great this year in run blocking or pass protection. One thing that Central Michigan does have going for it is they do have a lot of talent up in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you had guys like Laquan Johnson, Jacques Bristol, guys on the defensive line that have been able to get to the quarterback, get a lot of sacks in this team. So there are promising things of the Central Michigan team. And if you remember on week one, there's talent on this roster. They came within 14 points of Oklahoma State, and they posted, 34 points on the Pokes in the second half. We haven't seen that level of offensive explosiveness since, but they definitely have talent in that program. So this is a very difficult game to pick between two teams that their seasons aren't really trending in the right direction, but one of them has a chance to get an elusive win on Wednesday and possibly resurrect that back to bowl eligibility. We saw the 2016 Miami Redhawks go from 0-6 to 6-6. Who knows what's possible in this season? It's Maction after all. We got one final game for you, and that is Wednesday night on ESPN2 at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. That is Western Michigan traveling to the Doit at Doit Perry Stadium at Bowling Green. Bowling Green is a very intriguing team. They started 1-3. Just like Buffalo, they looked like they were one of the worst teams in the country because Bowling Green lost to an FCS team in 7 overtime fashion against Eastern Kentucky. And Bowling Green actually resurrected the next week, and they beat Marshall, who was fresh off a win over Notre Dame. So Bowling Green showed some week-to-week improvement, and Bowling Green has really got better ever since week 4 loss to Mississippi State. Now, the Falcons, what changed for them? Going into the season, I thought defense was going to be this team's calling card. We saw that last year when they beat Minnesota 14-10, really stifled Minnesota's rushing offense and especially their passing game that day in Minneapolis. Bowling Green's defense was one of the worst through, I'd say, the first 6 or so games of the season. But the last 2 games, they've seemed to figure things out. Bowling Green has held 2 teams below 20 points in consecutive games, Miami, Ohio, and Central Michigan, and their defense is finally causing havoc. They're forcing turnovers, they're winning turnover battles again, and they're getting to the quarterback. Although I thought Bowling Green's defense was going to be good this year, one thing I did not expect was for them to be second in the country in sacks per game. Carl Brooks is second in the country in individual sacks overall with 7.5, and Carl Brooks is going to be an all-MAC selection this year, deservingly so. Should be first team after he was third team last year. But this team has a lot of all-MAC defenders on it from the previous years. Darren Anders, who's a great tackler. Jordan Anderson, who's a safety who can play up at the line of scrimmage. You join Darren Anders, who's a linebacker, with a transfer linebacker, DJ Taylor from Wake Forest. You join Jordan Anderson with a transfer safety from Georgia State, Chris Bacon. And these transfers have been really impactful defenders for Bowling Green, especially in the last few weeks, and they have all collectively played together to allow the Falcons defense to step up. So while they're still on the bottom of defensive ranks due to their early season lumps that they took, Bowling Green's defense has really improved recently. Western Michigan has a pretty good defense too. And Western Michigan won their last game over Miami, Ohio, not by way of their offense, but by way of their defense. Won the turnover battle 1-0, and they forced a lot of pressure on Miami's offensive line. Corvin Moment is a tremendous pass rusher, one of the best linebacker pass rushers in the country right now with 6.5 sacks on the year. So you have Corvin Moment in there and a really talented linebacking core, and Western Michigan should be able to produce some stops in this game. Now, my concern for Western Michigan is the offense. They decided to switch quarterbacks this past week, switching from Jack Salopek to Trayson Bourget. Bourget is a true freshman, and while he won his first start, his completion percentage was under 50%, which you could expect that for a true freshman that was just thrust into the lineup in the middle of the season. So he could improve as the season goes on. So I do have my questions about Western Michigan's passing game. It was going to take a big step back after losing veteran talent like Caleb Ellaby and then Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Sky Moore. So they did face those challenges going into the season. Western Michigan likes to keep things more grounded. Running back Sean Tyler, he took over the Quick Lane Bowl last year, won MVP honors of that game. Great kick returner too. Had over 100 yards last week, so expect a heavy dose of Sean Tyler, especially with running back Ladarius Jefferson, who was the second fiddle earlier in the season. Jefferson's going to be out for this game and probably for the remainder of the season for Western Michigan. Now, moving on to Bowling Green's offense, this is a team that likes to throw the ball a lot. And their quarterback, Matt McDonald, has made tremendous strides since the 2020 season where Bowling Green couldn't get a win and they couldn't get anything on offense, struggled to complete forward passes at times. But now Matt McDonald is in command of this offense. Now, Bowling Green doesn't really have a running back or a wide receiver that has that number one skill position player role. This is a balanced team. They have a committee of running backs, a committee of receivers, and that's what they use to thrive on offense. And their offensive line has shown some improvements this year, along with their defensive line, which has been so dominant. So Bowling Green's winning games in the trenches right now, which is a nice development, and that's how you build a football program. And that is why this team is 4-4 right now. And this is already tied for their best season ever since they won the MAC championship in 2015. So good things are happening on campus with Scott Loeffler and Bowling Green if they beat Western Michigan on Wednesday, they are one win away from bowl eligibility. They have the longest bowl drought in the MAC, and no team is hurting for a good season more in conference play than Bowling Green. Western Michigan is 3-5 right now. And if that seems like a weird record for Western Michigan, it is, because Western Michigan hasn't had a losing season since PJ Fleck's first year on campus in 2013 when they went 1-11. Western Michigan hasn't really competed for conference championships since PJ Fleck left after that Cotton Bowl season, but they have always been in the mix of them as a winning team. That doesn't seem to be the case this year, but they are 2-2 in MAC play, and a win over Bowling Green could get them the necessary momentum they need to move the season forward, because there's a lot to build on with the decent defense they have, especially at defending the run. So making the picks for the last two games, for Central Michigan, Northern Illinois, the spread on this one is Northern Illinois by 4. This one's going to be a very tough pick. I like Northern Illinois outright, but I don't know if I like them to win by 3 or 5 in this one. I'm going to go Northern Illinois with the points. I like them at home. I like the way the offense has trended, and Central Michigan just hasn't seemed to have it in recent weeks. They should have lost to Akron if it weren't for a late scoop and score by Thomas Incoom, their defensive end, in that game, which led them for a touchdown. So I do like Northern Illinois in this one. Then to wrap things up, we have the Bowling Green versus Western Michigan game on Wednesday night. The spread in this one's Bowling Green by 4, and I do like Bowling Green with the points. If you look at Bowling Green's last outings, they beat Central Michigan by 16. They beat Miami, Ohio, and their stout defense by 4. They did have a bad loss to Buffalo in the mix, and they beat Akron by 3. But I think Bowling Green's improving on a week-to-week basis. They're back home at the Doit. I think they have some confidence built up, especially from that Central Michigan win. And Western Michigan's right now in the midst of replacing a quarterback. They're going to be without one of their running backs that usually carries the offense. So I do like Bowling Green with the points in this one in a matchup that's a little more defensive than the other ones, considering these are two of the defenses that I think can rise to the occasion and make this a lower scoring game in the MAC. Still, we have a week slate of exciting games, Tuesday, Wednesday nights. If you want to talk action, drop in the comments, or follow me on Twitter at @S_Helwick, Steve Helwick. I'm always down to talk